Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to this FEAT talk. This evening, FEAT talks with Jordi Casamitjana. Originally from Catalonia, but resident in the UK for several decades, Jordi Casamitjana is a vegan zoologist specialising in animal behaviour who has been involved in different aspects of animal protection for many years. In addition to scientific research, he has worked as an undercover investigator and animal welfare consultant. Some of his professional achievements include the closure of several zoos, securing the first successful prosecutions of UK illegal hunters under the Hunting Act 2004, and his participation in the banning of bullfighting in Catalonia. Jordi, who has been vegan since 2002, became well known in 2020 for securing the legal protection of all ethical vegans from discrimination in Great Britain in a landmark legal case that was discussed all over the world. Jordi is also the author of the books Ethical Vegan, A Personal and Political Journey to Change the World, and Why Vegans Don't, A Philosophical Guide to Vegan Behaviour, which has a chapter in itself about vivisection. Since 2020, he has become a freelance content writer and video creator for several vegan organisations, as well as a public speaker on veganism and animal rights issues. Good evening, Jordi.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much for coming. I'll leave it to you to impart your tale in your own good time. Thank you very much.
All right, then I'll start. Just imagine I am the old man that I actually am. I just have a longer beard than now. And we all sitting around the fire because this is going to be that type of talk. No PowerPoint presentations and nothing like that. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well? I just double check that you can hear me well. Yeah, okay. So this is going to be just me talking and telling you about my life, because I think I'm going to be talking about something that you probably never heard. When we talk about vivisection, we have a lot of stories about what's wrong with it, how much suffering the animals go through, how useless it is, how many things you can now do that can replace it, and they are much better as a test than they used to be. We know a lot about that, and also which companies doing what in where and what you need to do to stop them. But there is a little information about the vivisectionists themselves, how they become vivisectionists. There's very little knowledge about the process of getting a normal person and make them do this work. And I thought I could illuminate that question with my own experience, because I could have been a vivisectionist. That's something that not everybody can say. Well, everybody could have been, but I was really close. I was close. There were moments of my life that things have not, had they gone a little bit different, I might have been a vivisectionist rather than an ethical vegan. And that is what I want to convey generally with my talk. How thin is the line between the good guys and the bad guys? How thin is the line between becoming an ethical vegan, trying to help anyone, and becoming an exploitative person trying to get information by torturing animals? So that seems two very distinct ways of being, but in fact, really is easy to fall into one another. Depends what happened to you. And in my life, what I try to explain is my life and pinpoint to you those moments that things could have turned. And I could have gone the other way. And then you'll understand it when I give you the context. That's essential, because obviously, theoretically, that is possible. But the difference between taking one route or the other is the context, whatever happened there, the knowledge I had, the information I had. So I want to give you the whole context first, so you're able to put yourself in my position. And then we'll move through my life. And then you encounter those moments where you then, if you put yourself in my position, you might think, oh, I perhaps could have gone the other way. We'll see. But let me start with the beginning, the whole context. The context is, well, where I was born. Let's start with the first day I was born. I was born in the early 60s. So I am a boomer indeed, as you can see with my color of my hair, or the lack of my hair as well, the combination of both. And I was born in Catalonia, in Barcelona is the capital of Catalonia, in a time during a period where Catalonia had quite a bad time. Catalonia, historically, we always been trying to become independent. We have been independent many times before, and then the Spaniards invade us, and then we get independent again. That has been the history of Catalonia for millennia. And one of the last time, well, the last time that we tried was no longer, about 6 or 7 years ago. You might remember this, and that didn't work. But the time before that, we did manage to become independent for a while. But there was a backlash from that. And that's kind of what the beginning of my story begins, because that was in the 30s, 1930s. And that's when in Spain there was a republic. Like in the UK, Spain not always had a monarch. There were periods of Republican government, like I had Oliver Cromwell. In Spain 2 or 3 times there was a republic, or the monarchy was expelled. And one of the latest ones in the early 30s, this was quite a relaxed republic. And that allowed the Catalans said, well, they're so relaxed, let's go and become independent now. And they made a move, and the Spanish Republican governments didn't care that much. So they didn't stop it. So in that allowed Catalonia to become a kind of semi-independent. Nobody was stopping us. But there was a general in the army of the Republican government who was stationed in the Canary Islands, that he was very unhappy with that. He was a Catholic general. He liked this old-fashioned idea of the imperial Spain, and he didn't like the Spain being taken into pieces with independent groups. He wanted to get rid of this, and he was quite inspired by an Italian that had got into power in Italy, Mussolini, who started something called fascism, this new invention he started that seemed to be quite exciting. And he this general was called General Francisco Franco, and he was thinking perhaps I should do the same. Fascism seems to be quite appealing, and we can just get these Catalans back into Spain, and all the Basques as well back into Spain, all these sort of things. But he was in the Canary Islands, quite separated. And then he actually, most people don't know this, and you will be surprised about that, he contacted the British Secret Service, because at the time, the British were not that anti-fascist. That was before the Second World War. They were still considering, should we become a fascist like the Italians? So the English Secret Service gave him a plane to fly from the Canary Islands to mainland Spain, and that started the Spanish Civil War. So the British helped the Spanish Civil War. That was in 1936. That's before the Second World War. But Hitler already existed. Hitler already had won his election. He hadn't started the invasion of Poland yet. So he used the Spanish Civil War to test his weapons, to test his tactics. And for instance, Guernica, this city in Basque Country, was bombed by the Lufthansa, the German planes, helping Franco's army. As an experiment, nobody had bombed a city before from the air, and civilians, and that was the first time civilians were used to kill civilians from the air, and was an experiment that Hitler tried in Spain. It worked, and then he did it back in the Second World War. But that means Franco had all the support of Hitler logistically, and he won. He won the war. And at one point, Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler, they met on a train. They took a train all together and met in the middle of nowhere, trying to see how they would divide Europe in 3 parts. And Franco didn't like the bit he got. He thought it was too small, and Hitler wanted the biggest piece. So, because they were kind of children, he got a tantrum and said, I'm not going to help her in the Second World War. And he became neutral in the Second World War, which was unfortunate for Catalans, because when the Second World War ended and Hitler died, Mussolini was executed, Franco survived because he didn't participate in the war. Nobody went after him, and he died of an old age 40 years after. So Spain had 40 years of a fascist dictatorship, when in Europe had already been eliminated. And in the last 12 years of that period, I experienced it. I was born in the last 12 years. So when I was 12 is when he died, so I remember quite well living in a fascist regime. And for those that, why is this relevant? I'll tell you in a minute. For those that don't know what the fascist regime is, because we use the word fascism all the time, but unless you lived it, you might not quite know it or grasp it. It's essentially summarizing, is transforming a country into a company, into a corporation, where there is a CEO on top that makes all the decisions. If you don't follow through, you're fired. In the case of a country, you killed, but that's what it means, you're fired. You need, each department is dictated by rules. The power is always from top to bottom. There is no variation. There is a brand to follow. And it's very insular. It's that you don't want to communicate or get in contact with other companies. We're going to be self-sufficient, produce all the things you need. So fascist regimes are very insular. They don't need to cooperate it. And Spain survived for 40 years without the need of anybody else, because the whole fascist regime was designed not to need help from anybody else. But also means, because it was a fascist regime, is eliminated all diversity. Anything that was not what the CEO wanted was eliminated. Anybody who was not Spaniard had to be eliminated. So the Catalan language, which is my language, became illegal. Catalan names like Jordi, my name is a Catalan name, was illegal. So it made illegal any variation, and anybody that was a dissident would be executed. And it created just a simple model with a single religion, all political parties banned, all religions except the Roman Catholic banned. So a single monochromic vision. And that's kind of important because it means for the first 12 years of my life, I only saw one way of living, that I didn't know that there was other things. I never saw a vegetarian. That was impossible to even conceive. Actually, at the latest years, I met one vegetarian who was a Jehovah's Witnesses, and I thought vegetarian mean being a Jehovah's Witnesses because there was the only one I had met. Vegan, not even a concept of that. So, and not even a black person. So I only saw a black person in Christmas Day once. He was dressed as one of the three kings that's supposed to be black. And I don't know where they took him from, but in the streets that was unseen. So no variation of race or obviously homosexuality was banned. Everything was monochromatic, far-right, Catholic, one single culture. So I grew up into that situation, and I found it very scary because being a Catalan, constantly we had to survive underground. Every time that we went to a place that I didn't know, the first thing you should ask is, who is he? And the who is he meant, who is the informer? Because every place will be an informer of the state, that you should know where he was, so that you would not talk close to that person to give any subversive talk, because that will be passed above and then you will arrest it. Any group of people meeting without reason was illegal. Assembly was illegal. You could only meet. I remember one day we were at a mass. We were all Catholics, obviously. We had to go to mass, but the people stay after the mass for a while, and then the police came because that was an illegal gathering because people stayed there after the mass. So grew up in that environment. I was very scared all the time. Police is the thing that scares me the most. They were all Spaniards. They had all mustaches. They were in gray uniforms. So I was really scared. And what I didn't know then, and I only learned it not that long ago, is that I'm autistic. So that made it even worse because that was a neurotypical world with fascists. Can you imagine? It's already bad because it's neurotypical, not adapted to my way of living. And then you put some fascists there. And 1 year I was attacked and mocked or bullied, depends how the intensity of the label you want to say it. 20 times in a single year, I was kidnapped or beaten or money stolen from me. And of course, as Catalans, we could not go to the police when that happened. So there was crime that was completely untouched if the victims were Catalans. So and that was how I grew up. So I kind of felt, okay, this world is terribly upsetting, and I'm not going to survive much. What can I do as a profession that implies never being close to a human being, perhaps being alone somewhere? And through growing up, I felt that none of these problems happened with non-human animals. We had dogs and cats, and I felt so relaxed around non-human animals. They felt my type of creature. So I was generally inclined to them. And because I'm autistic, we have these subjects of interest that we get obsessed about. So animals became my subject of interest because they were the only ones I felt not threatened by. And so after a while, I thought, well, what can I do? And then I don't know, there is something called biology, that you can become a biology. And then so, oh, right, I can just do that and just be with animals. And then I learned, actually, there's a type of biology called zoology, which is more about what you want. So every time I was learning a new word, I realized, that is what I need to do. Because I just wanted to find a profession that I could be in the wild with the animals without any human, because I didn't know that there were other regimes. I didn't know that there were other ways of living, because I grew up in a fascist regime. But Franco died in 1975, and then the whole thing opened up. Political parties were legal again. Everything changed. Democracy and start. But there was a kind of a period of transition that nobody knew whether that would stick. And in fact, there was another coup d'etat during that period of 5 years that almost returned to fascism again, but it failed. But there was these 5 years of touch and go. The informants were still around. People were still knowing who was, because there were no revolution in the sense that they arrested everybody. He died, and then all the bad people retained positions of power, so they just changed jackets, they call it, or changed shirts. So everybody was suspicious with everybody else. So I said, well, yeah, I'm still not quite happy. I still feel threatened. So I want to do this. And I thought, okay, let's go and do biology. That seemed to be a profession. And at the time, in the 80s, there was one degree I could do in Barcelona University that included biology. There was not a specific degree in biology. You had to become first a biologist and then a zoologist. So in other countries, they would do zoology directly. And today, most degrees are 3 years. At the time, the big degrees were 5 years. So that was a 5-year degree in which the first 3 years, you become a biologist. And then you had 3 routes to choose. They're called modes: zoology, animals; botany, plants; and fundamental, which is the rest: biochemistry, genetics, all the other part of biology. So the first 3 years you had to do all the same that everybody, and then the last 2 years you could choose any of these 2. So you had to become a biologist first. So and I thought, well, that's how it's going to be. I was not quite sure whether I would be successful, but my vocation was zoology. I wanted to do that. Then I joined the first year, I think 1982, the first course, and I had to check some of my documents with my courses. This is what the document of my course. By the way, if you can actually read this, you can see that my name says Jordi Casamitjana Costa. That's because my name, Jordi, was illegal. It was not in my birth certificate. They had to put a Spanish name, which I hate, Jorge, but that's the only one I had. And this first year, the first year was, can you hear me? I thought I touched the mic. And I think, yeah. The first year, I had mathematics, chemistry, physics, and biology. And I just did all more or less okay. But then biology, I got the top mark. And the top mark in that time, they call it the matrícula de honor in Spanish, the honor fee, because what happens is if you were the top person in your class, then next year you didn't pay one tuition fee. They give you a free tuition fee if you managed to be the first one. So everybody had the maximum, the top grades. Then they would need to go through a process to select one, and that process would be an oral exam. So I was one of the selected, and I was excited because, and it seems I'm vocational. Seems, I might know about biology. And I was excited because I thought they would ask me questions about zoology, but they didn't. So everybody asked me questions about the other biology things. And they asked me questions about proteins and the ribosomes, and I had to explain how proteins are made in a cell and blah, blah, blah. And I did it, and I did it very well. And I aced it, and all the professors, they said, this was excellent. They gave me that top mark, how they call this, in an academic distinction. But that was weird because they said to me, no, you probably shouldn't go through zoology. You should go towards genetics or physiology or cytology, which is the study of cells, because I was so good about that. And that was the first thing that started to perhaps pushing me towards a different direction I didn't want to go. I had these big grades, and everybody said that I was going to be good about that. But in my mind, I wanted to work on the field, not on a lab. And I started to be confused, but that's the only time people had to kind of give me such a huge grade. I felt, well, okay, I will have to see what happens. So I did the first year. The second year, well, that was the most critical year, because in the second year, the courses were cytology and histology, which is tissues and cells, biostatistics, mathematics, biochemistry, and botany. But there was also some practical tests to do. And that is the year where the Faculty of Biology used to test who would be a good vivisectionist. And they do it, and not most people won't know this, perhaps they don't do it anymore now, but at the time they do it this way. They wanted to check who would be squeamish enough not to be able to handle animals and kill them and torture them. So there was a test of your ability to control your emotions in facing torture. And if you didn't pass the test, you would be kicked out of the faculty. So anybody, even the botanists or the zoologists that would only work with plants, they would have to go through that process in the second year of biology. And if you did not pass that test, no matter how good grades you had in the rest of the stuff, you would be kicked out. It was definitely a test to desensitize you as a biologist, to make sure that if you are too emotional, too compassionate, you cannot work with us. And if you are a little bit compassionate, we'll get rid that out of your brain by some training. And the test, I was already very nervous, of course, we all were. So because especially among the students, we had this division. We said there are two types of biologists, the white coat biologists, the lab people, and the boots biologists, the field people like the zoologists and the botanists. So we had this always, didn't understand why we had to do the whole thing at the same time. We couldn't start separately because we were so different. So we were all upset about having to do that, and I really didn't want to do that. So it consists in several things, and the last one was the worst of all. The several things were just learning to handle rats, to take a rat from one place, hold it with the hand and put it in another. It was so gradual. It was this process of getting used to the thing without you thinking. So first thing was just handling, then feeding them. It all looks like kind of benign. You give them food and you get accustomed to handling more and more. And then you pass that, or you okay, next thing, now you're feeding them, next thing. And the last one was the clincher. The last one was the one that you didn't do that, then you didn't pass. You had to decapitate a live rat. You had to do it without anesthesia. You had to kill with your own hands a rat without anesthesia. If you were hesitant or you didn't want that to do, you would not pass. Of course, I had a degree. That means I did it. I did it, and it was such a traumatic thing, and I was so bad about it, and it traumatized you so much. But it felt that there was no alternative. Nobody gave me an alternative. There was no plan B. There was not, if you cannot do this, then we have this other degree for you. There was not. So if you wanted to be a zoologist to study animals in the wild, you needed to decapitate a rat. That was the rule. And because we're still in that transition process, this is Spain still going into that mode, fascist mode, that there are rules that you have to follow, and if not, you cannot be part of us. So they're still in that mentality. That rules have to be followed. So we all complained, but we did it. And then, of course, I was quite upset. But then I also was confused because I was thinking, okay, I've been told that perhaps zoology is not my thing. Perhaps I should do more of the lab stuff. Now I've been doing this. The worst case, I've already done it. Perhaps next time it's going to be easier and it's going to be less difficult for me. Perhaps, so I was buying the idea of getting desensitized and thinking, oh, perhaps at one point I would not care anymore. Eventually thinking my empathy will not kick in. Because, of course, I didn't think that there was anything fundamentally wrong with it. Of course, I was not even aware of something called veganism. I just was entering the system. And as an autistic person, everything looked more hostile anyway. So I was struggling to fit in just buying some food. Imagine in a university where there are all these rules and I'm still trying to figure out what is going on. And they tell me that I have to do this. And I'm considering what I have to do. So I was even considering, should I just not do it? And then the second year is the year that I had to kind of make a choice, because that year, the third year, the subjects were zoology, geology, genetics, and microbiology. So I had zoology there now, and that was my test. If I did good in zoology, perhaps I could forget all the other stuff and forget the rat thing, and just go into zoology. So I was very keen to be good. But the other thing they did, and that year, was genetics. And the genetics, they force you to do other vivisection stuff, which most people don't think is vivisection. And I definitely didn't think it was vivisection at the time, because it involved insects. Almost all genetic studies are done with fruit flies. Fruit flies, Drosophila melanogaster, because they reproduce very quickly. You have many generations in a very short period of time. You can study genetics and mutation. So they train you to grow them. At the first year, they train you to kill them and handle mammals. Now, the second year, they train you to grow animals for research. They train you to how to grow them and then how to anesthetize it and kill them and all this stuff. Because they were flies, didn't feel that horrible like the rats, but we still were doing the same thing, still was vivisection. So they were still trying to add more elements to use desensitization, in this case using an insect that you're already less involved, emotionally speaking. But there was also this degree of this course of zoologists. And among this course, that's when I met a professor, Dr. Enrique Alonso de Medina, who was an ethologist. An ethology is the science that studies animals' behavior comparatively in the wild, which is really what I wanted to be. So when I discovered biology, I thought that is it. Then I discovered zoology. Oh, that is it. Actually, when I discovered ethology, it's that part of zoology that I wanted to do. Go in the wild, not interfere, just observe, like Jane Goodall, for instance, that she's an ethologist as well. So I was excited that he was there because he was not allowed to give lessons or teaching classes of ethology in the university in Barcelona, because we were still in that period of adaptation between the fascism and democracy proper, and still the Catholic Church had control of education. And there was this group of the Catholic Church, very radical cultish type, it's called Opus Dei. If you've seen the Da Vinci Code or read the book, the bad guys of the Da Vinci Code, they are Opus Dei. They actually exist. These people exist. They are not obviously exaggerating in the movie, but they exist, and they are nasty, and they are cultish type, and their function is to infiltrate every part of society. It prevents that anything that is evolution or anything that has not to do with Catholicism is infiltrated. So their presence in biology faculties were huge, trying to prevent people to learn about evolution. And ethology, animal behavior, had always this position that we humans are animals and we study humans as anybody else, and that was unacceptable by the Opus Dei and the Catholics, so they didn't allow ethology to be taught. While it was already a known thing, in 1973, there were 3 Nobel Prizes of ethologists, Carl von Frisch, Nicotin Bergen, Konrad Lorenz. They were people I had read in books now, because I could not do it in the university. But he was an ethologist because he had studied in London. He had, from a youth, he went to London and he studied under Desmond Morris. Desmond Morris, who died last year, he was an ethologist, British ethologist, and he was one of his pupils. So he was of the Desmond Morris school, and he came back, and they prevent him to teach, and he rebelled against the system, and he was giving private lessons to people in his house against the rules. Every now and then give a talk at the university against the rules, packed. And I was going to all these private lessons and learning the subversive ethology with him, and I became his assistant. So I was so interested. And then I kind of started to discover rebellion, what it meant, the ability to rebel against the system, and kind of learning about ethology. So when I had to do this dissertation about zoology in that course, which was a written thing, a bibliographic thing, I thought, well, perhaps if I do something extra, something nobody else has done, then it would prove to myself and everybody else that zoology is my thing, is no the white coat thing. So, and I asked him, look, I want to do some field research, not just bibliographic, field research a little bit, and added it to my dissertation to show, look, I'm so advanced. And I asked him, which subject, which animals do you think I could do? Because obviously I'm in the middle of the city. Where can I go to observe some animals? And his specialty was also insects. And he suggested, well, insects are all around. You can do some insects. I said, yeah, I like that. And then he said, well, you could do some wasps, because wasps, everybody hates wasps. Everybody kills them. Nobody knows much about them. So there would not be much people competing with you if you develop a degree or career with wasps. Nobody else is doing it. And I have seen a nest in campus somewhere between the faculty and the canteen, because I was in another building. There was a big area that was by the football club, the Barcelona Football Club Stadium. There was an area that was used as a parking lot for when there were big matches. And when there were no matches, it was empty, and that was in between the canteen and the university and the faculty. And there was a big structure, and he had seen a nest of wasps, particular genus called Polistes. And this genus, wasps, they do nest with paper, contrary to bees. Bees do wax, wasps do paper. But most European wasps, or the ones you find in Britain, they have cells inside the paper with a cover outside, so you don't really see what's happening inside. But there's a genus Polistes, you don't see it in the British Islands, but you see everywhere in the world. For some reason, they are not here. Well, they're starting to arrive now with the global warming. But these ones, they don't have an external paper cover. So you can actually watch what's going on inside without having to do anything from a distance. You can actually see. So they were perfect for doing an ethological study. So I decided, okay, that seems a good idea. I learned about Polistes a lot, and this particular species was called Polistes dominulus. Perhaps they can change the name now because that was years ago. Dominulus, dominus means house. Because these ones, they tend to do nests in cavities within structures. That means there might be a hole then before you actually see the nest. And that was the case. So it was a brick structure, and there were some holes in it because it was not properly made. It was a ventilation shaft from the underground parking. And there were some holes, and there were a nest there. And I knew, because I had read enough about police tests, that these ones, what they do, they have guards outside in the hole. And the guard is the person, or the wasp in this case, that raise the alarm if something happens. If somebody gets closer, or another wasp from another colony gets in, they will raise the alarm. They will move the wings in a little bit, open a little bit. They release a pheromone scent, and that is an alarm. Then everybody that smells that scent inside moves out and stings whoever is closer. And if they sting you, they leave another pheromone on you that is basically advertising, I should be stung. And then wherever you go, any wasp, even from another colony, if they see you, they smell you, they sting you, because you just basically advertise me, I'm a dangerous creature, please sting me. So I knew that I had to be very careful not to raise the alarm, and I had to pay attention to the guard. There was only one. They take turns. It's not the same one. They take turns. And I had to look at her, because if she moved the wings in a particular way that I knew how, and it was less of a second to react, I had to run like crazy. I had my notebook like this in case that they would attack me. I had time to intercept them and then run like crazy. I had that plan. So I was very nervous, and I saw the guard, and I walked very slowly approaching. My heart was like crazy. And then she saw me. I could see it. Police have a flat face, so bees have a round head, so you don't see when they're looking. But because police have a flat face, when they turn, you can see how they move their head. So she turned, she looked, she moved the antenna. That's how they smell. They smell me. She put herself in a position in front of me. You could clearly saw her checking me out, completely identifying me as a potential danger. He started to move the wings up, and my heart was like crazy. I was ready to jump, and then she moved the wings down, and she relaxed. She looked at me, and in her mind said, "You're all right. You're not dangerous. I see your demeanor. I see your behavior. You will find you can watch." And that blew my mind completely. 1 inch individual in a couple of seconds had judged me so well, and yet I grew up with all these people telling me, no, you're not Catalan, you're Spanish, no, you're not Jordi, you're Jorge. All these dangerous people attacking, taking my money, biting me out, kidnapping me, all these things. Humans were so hostile. And this 1 inch individual that everybody hates, that everybody wants to kill, he just said, no, you're right. I can tell. I know enough about this world to judge a good person or not. I realized, well, I cannot possibly be just a scientist. This is so unfair the way we treat anybody else. And if that individual can judge me so well, imagine a dog, imagine a pig, imagine a chicken. So I can't just be a scientist and observer. I need to change this injustice that is so bad of how we treat everybody else that is not human. I need to become an animal protectionist. I need to dedicate my life to protect them, because it's so clear that they are like us at the least, if not better, in many respects. And then I thought, well, I just need to do both. I need to develop my career as a zoologist and find a way to live as an animal protectionist. So I carry on doing my degree. Then I did my 2 years of zoology, and I started my PhD on social wasps. And I did a kind of extra years to do a PhD course, which I didn't finish. I didn't become a doctor, but almost. I did all the things I had to do except reading the thesis at the end, and now you'll understand why. But all this time, I was trying to figure out how I could do both the scientist and protectionist. But the first thing I had to do is finish a career, and then I'll see how I would work. But it didn't seem that it was possible to do in Catalonia. Nobody was living from protecting animals. There were animal groups, but they were all volunteers. There was nothing professional. I knew it existed in other places. So, but eventually, I finished my career. I'm about to finish my PhD and to read it. And I'm feeling, okay, is this what I want to do? Is this what I want to be, an academic, stay all my life in a university teaching in a country where I cannot really protect animals because there is no infrastructure for me to do those? All this year I was rescuing wasps all the time. I was known as the waspman. The police even knew me as the waspman. Every time there was an emergency of a nest in a very dodgy place, they knew that in the University of Barcelona there was a waspman. So they will contact, and sometimes with the sirens, they will come to pick me up, take me to the place, and I would take the nest and rescue it, not kill it. I was translocate it and keep it safe. So I would always rescue wasps. That was my thing. So people thought, thought I was completely crazy. But yeah, finishing my degree, I'm so close, and I thought, no. And also because being an autistic, I didn't adapt at all to the university life. I didn't have friends, didn't have relationships. It really, because of the autistic thing, I didn't fit in. So it was all these things that made me feel this is not quite what I dreamt for. This is not the degree I was hoping, and then become a scientist. And the academia, I was disillusioned about how much of a career had become. It was just about not about the truth anymore or helping animals. It was just about getting more publications and getting higher in the structure. It was a whole career, had nothing to do with being a scientist. And I didn't want to be sucked in. And then also had a relationship that didn't work. So everything was pointing to me that this is not the place I should be. This is not the place I can do any of the things I want to do. I need to go to another place in the world where I can be a zoologist and an animal protectionist. And but I didn't know where. So I decided, okay, let's do the big gym. I'm both autistic and ADHD. And my ADHD part was responsible for this, the next step. The ADHD part is the one that is impulsive and made me push and said, leave. Get rid of all your possessions, select 2 bags, one in the front, one in the back, with the things you want to carry with you, and walk out without planning anything and try to find something. And that's what I did. I just got rid of everything and I walked out, went into France, it's the next country, tried to survive and do it there, didn't work. I went to Belgium, didn't work. I went to the Netherlands, didn't work. I went to Germany, didn't work. I went to Denmark, didn't work. And then I thought, should I go to Sweden or the UK? I had the choice. I had no money, I had nothing. I had just a credit card without money in it. And I could use it to buy a ticket. And sitting in the middle of the square of Copenhagen in Denmark, I decided, I'm going to go to the UK. So I took a bus that takes 2 ages, crossed the channel with the bus, and arrived about 7 in the afternoon. The sunset was down. Everything looked warm and nice. I walked through London. I looked at the pub. There was a TV on. It was in the evening, and there was news. And I looked in, and there was Trevor McDonald reading the news of ITV. And I thought, they have a black presenter in the afternoon. This is going to be the place. This is going to be the place that they will accept somebody like me. I was a crazy guy. So I decided, yeah, it's going to be this. So I decided that today, I said, okay, I'm going to adapt now because I couldn't speak English at that point. My first word in English was in Belgium when I was in Belgium. So I was an adult already. So, and I had no spoken English. This language that you can hear me using it, I learned it as an adult. So, and I had to survive. And my first 2 years was just doing the worst possible immigrant jobs that you can imagine. Everything you see immigrants doing, I was doing it just to survive and to be able to get by. And what I did during the summers is I hitchhiked through the British Islands. And every time a car stopped me, I asked, do you know anywhere they might need a zoologist? And they said, no, okay, next one. And I kept doing this, hoping that one day somebody said yes. And one day somebody said yes. When I did the entire thing, I did the whole Wales, I did the whole England, well, almost of England, all Scotland, whole Ireland, northern and south. The last bit I needed to do is Cornwall. And one of the cars that took me to Cornwall, I asked the question, they said, perhaps there is a primate sanctuary in Loo in Cornwall that then perhaps need a zoologist. I don't know. I said, I'm going to go there. So I went there and I moved around. And the first steps I put in the sanctuary line, I look at the house, I look at several windows, I look at the window, and I thought that's going to be my room. Somehow I knew, and that ended up being my room. And I just talked to them. They said, well, we have volunteers every now and then. There's a huge queue. You can come on next year, and then we have 2 weeks for volunteers. I said, fine. I went back to London. I learned anything about woolly monkeys. This is the only species they had, the woolly monkey sanctuary, Amazonian woolly monkey. So by the time I came as a volunteer, I was an expert of woolly monkeys. I put my autism thing into getting every information about woolly monkeys. So I did the whole volunteer thing. And then the last day I had this Sunday where you had a meeting because they live in a community. The monkey sanctuary was different than anything else because monkeys and humans live in a community, separated with enclosures, but they live on site, everybody. And there was an experiment from the 60s that created the sanctuary. Len Williams was the founder. Was a Spanish guitar teacher, and he had a woolly monkey pet. He thought he was wrong. He decided, let's create a sanctuary. He took all his students, music guitar students, with him, created a commune, that was in the 60s, and where monkeys and humans live together, and that became popular and people came to see it. So that was that weird, bizarre sanctuary. So they had still the communist structure. So they had these meetings in the Sundays. And in the meeting the Sundays, I said, well, I know that you've been dreaming in taking the monkeys back to the Amazon where they belong, because they're all descendants of pets that were rescued. I'm a zoologist, I'm an ethologist, I can do that for you. I can teach them the skills they lost in captivity because I'm an ethologist, if you hire me. And they said, fine. And they hired me, and I became the rehabilitation coordinator at the Monkey Sanctuary. And since then, I had always worked in animal protection. I never worked in anything else. And that was in 1995. But I was still a meat eater. And I started, when I left the sanctuary, I moved to One Free Foundation, and I was doing this contradiction of trying to help some animals, but I still wearing some. And I had this push from the WASP experience of protect animals, but clearly I had not gone all the way. But I had never seen a vegetarian or vegan. So when I moved to London and was this immigrant, I did see vegetarians. I share a flat with one, but no vegan. Vegan was a word I started to learn, but they didn't seem real, the vegan idea. But when I did go to the Monkey Sanctuary, I met the first vegan. It was one of the keepers there. So there was really very reason to me figure out the vegans is possible. People do survive with it. And so when I left the Monkey Sanctuary, I worked at Born Free, I already knew that there was possibility to be vegan, and I should be, but I didn't quite know how to do it. Somebody at the Born Free Foundation was also vegan and made me realize, because initially I thought, well, probably you can be vegan in a sanctuary like a community because it's all isolated, but not in the real world. But this Tricia was there in the real world. And so I thought, perhaps I should be vegan. And around this time, I had an accident. So I was workaholic. I was trying to close zoos. When in your introduction, you said that I closed 5 zoos. That was that time. I was kind of the Born Free Foundation. And I was always investigating undercover zoos and doing reports, and the press was involved. And it was a 3 floors building. And I was at the top, and my desk was at the bottom, and the top was the place where you do the recordings and the studio, the editing. So I was editing of some video from the press that was waiting for me urgently, so I was rushing. And I forgot something, the name of the lion I was editing. So I had to rush downstairs to take it from in my desk. And I tripped on the stairs while I was going downstairs. And when I tripped, I was going to fall with my belly on the floor and probably break on my bones. But I had the skill somehow to propel with my hands, with railings, and then try to move my legs in front of me. So rather than falling on my face, trying to get my legs first and follow my feet. So trying to push up so to have the time to move my head, because it was a long stair, so I had a long time to fall. And I did it, but I pushed too much. And I crashed my head against the ceiling because I pushed too much. And I got unconscious. And I didn't know this. I didn't know that when you're unconscious, you also dream. I thought you only dream when you sleep, but when you have a trauma, you get unconscious, you also dream. So while I was unconscious, I had an amazing dream. And then I was woken up by the paramedics, obviously they called the ambulance. And the first thing I said to the paramedic was, I had this amazing dream. And the paramedic stopped me immediately, said, yeah, you'll tell me later. How many fingers can you see? Blah, blah. He did all the things that he had to do. So by the time he finished and said, well, it's just a concussion, nothing back to, well, I was taken to the hospital, x-rayed, nothing more. I had forgotten the dream. I completely forgot the dream. As you know, it happens some dreams. If you don't talk about them immediately, you forget them. But it was such an important dream that nagged me for days. And I thought, I had all these contradictions about eating meat, the vegans that I exist, I should be vegan. And I decided perhaps I should relax and stop, because I was such a workaholic. I would never take one single day of holiday. And my bosses was always saying, you need to take holidays. I would never do it. And I approached my boss and said, okay, I'm going to take some holidays. How many do I have? 23 days. Okay, I'll find an island somewhere isolated in the middle of the Atlantic in winter where there's nobody. I will spend 23 days in isolation there, trying to remember the dream, because that dream seemed to be a very important thing, and reflect about my life. And I did find it. I did find a way to get the island in the middle of the Atlantic in winter, in the winter between 2001 and 2002. And I went and remembered the dream and confronted my inconsistencies. And actually, while I was there, I was writing a novel in which I thought it would be a good exercise for me to get things out of my head, all my inconsistencies, that ended up being published, which is called The Demon's Trial. But I published it under a pseudonym J.C. Costa, because I was still an undercover investigator, so I was still trying to be discreet. It's a novel, but it's autobiographical about things that happened in my life. And one of the chapters is the story of Anna. Anna is the name I gave to the rat I decapitated, which, of course, at the time, none of the rats had names, but my guilt made me give her a name, so I could not forget her. And one of the chapters, and The Demon's Trial is the story of a campaigner who's put on trial by the animals he failed. And of course, Anna was there to put me on trial for having killed her, and all the other animals he failed. So after I ended the book, I returned as an ethical vegan. So I went to the island as a meat eater, and I returned as an ethical vegan. And that could have been so different had I not decided to study WASP and never encountered that first WASP, had I not joined the lessons of Enrique Alonso de Molina about ethology, who would then not have suggested me to study WASP, had I not had a good degree or a good dissertation on the zoology course and decided, okay, I'm going to go to the white court. So many things could have happened. And anything this was decided by the information I knew at the time, the options I have at the time, and had it been a little bit different, things would have gone in the other way around. And that is the lesson of the story. The story is anybody could have been a vivisectionist. In any of you, something would happen in your life, slightly different you could have been. And just be grateful that the right things happened and you become one of us. So that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jordi. What an excellent tale. So we have a question from Deborah. Deborah says, hi, Jordi. How did you get into undercover work? And how did you cope with it?
Badly. The second one. So I went correctly, but I coped badly. I don't recommend it to anyone, honestly. It's a horrible thing to do. It messes you with your head, and somebody has to do it, but not everybody has to do it. So just let the 2 or 3 people that do it well do it, and just don't want to imitate them because it's hard. The worst thing of it is not what you see, is that you cannot react to what you see. The way I went into it was gradual. I didn't plan it. When I was at the Monkey Center with the primates, I gradually became good at it without me even knowing I was doing it, because my plan to take the monkeys back to the Amazon implied to find a place in the Amazon to take them. So every winter that was winter in the UK, I would travel to the Amazon, try to find this place. And that's how I'm fluent in Portuguese, because I learned it. But also I wanted to sell the story because we didn't have the money. So I had to fundraise for it. So we needed to explain the story, how these monkeys were taken from the Amazon to the Europe. And nobody knew actually how they were taken. So I had to investigate to find out how. So when I was in Brazil, I started to pretend to be people in order to investigate this thing. And eventually I found out how they did it, how they took them from Brazil to Europe. And it was never as expected initially. By me pretending being a buyer, pretending being a dealer, and realizing people were buying it, people, even if I was speaking with accent. So I was not bad. In fact, incidentally, autistic people are quite good actors. Because when you see me now relatively normal, that's not me. If I was alone, I would be rocking and doing all of stuff. That's me acting my mask. So we are good at learning how to behave like normal people. So you can be somebody else that is not the one that you've been playing all these years. So I learned I could do it. And being autistic, I also can control my emotions expression in my face better, perhaps. So that gave me an advantage. People didn't know how much internally I was experiencing stress because in my face didn't show up. So then I realized, I'm quite good about it. Then when I moved from that to the Born-Free Foundation, and then we had to investigate zoos, so then I kept doing it, go undercover into the zoo world, and then the techniques of how to use cameras. So before I knew it, I learned all the techniques and the behavioral aspects. So when I left, was it Born-Free? Yeah, I think, yeah. When I went Born-Free, then I became a freelance investigator for a while, where people from different organizations would hire me to go undercover, often about wildlife trade issues, will be legal wildlife trade stuff, mostly wildlife as opposed to farm animals. And then when I work into anti-bullfighting campaign later on for an organization called CAS International, and part of it with the League Against Cruel Sports, I also went undercover into the bullfighting world. But again, I knew all these techniques already and I started to do it. But the hard part is that you have to control your emotions, which is hard, especially when you see something, and you cannot intervene. And because you cannot intervene, that builds guilt in your mind. You might teach yourself that you're doing this for a good cause, but viscerally, you want to intervene all the time and you can't. And that generates such internal conflict and guilt that is physically and mentally damaging. So I hated it. Every time I had to do it, I didn't like it to do it. I cried before, I cried afterwards. It was, as an autistic person, even my regulation of emotions were all over the place. But I did it. But as I said, if somebody else is doing it, you don't have to do it. Don't feel that it's something you have to do it.
Yeah, it's quite a wearing adventure.
Yeah.
Rebecca Humphreys says, what advice would you give animal activists who feel a sense of despair on what is being done to animals? How would you advise them to approach this without it leading to quietism or apathy?
That's a difficult question because it really varies from person to person. You need to find the way that you can deal with it. And it's not up to me to tell you which was it because I don't know you, whoever you are. So it will be a balance between the things that you are good at and the things that you can achieve with the circumstances of your life, whether you work or you don't, or you have money or you don't. And then if you can combine both, what the environment allows you to do with the skills you have, and you can channel all this towards the animal cause, whatever it is, could be a big vegan campaign or could be a single issue campaign, it doesn't matter. If you achieve an abolitionist goal, a reformist goal is not a goal. A reformist goal is just keeping the status quo. But you can stop something, rescue someone, ban something, create a law that makes it impossible to do something. It's all about banning and stopping, whether it's big or not, or make people vegan or promote the concept of veganism and animal rights. In whatever media you know best, could be art, could be activism itself, could be writing, could be just sharing and stuff. That's how you can cope, because then you feel that you've been using your time properly. But sometimes it takes a lot of time for people to find their niche. So, and the best way is, I would say, try different things, experiment, try the things that work for you, see whatever you feel. Don't do it just because others do it. Just do it because you want to test yourself whether that works for you, and then move to the next one until you find something that fits. So essentially, is the sense of purpose. When you feel that you actually helping is when you can cope with it. The desperation comes when you feel that you're doing nothing. Therefore, the answer is do something.
Thank you. Great answer. It's always a difficult thing trying to assess what other people can do, what their strengths and weaknesses are.
Indeed.
I was curious myself to going back to your rat decapitation and the fact that was a necessary part of your degree, of your education. I was wondering about the situation itself. I know within laboratories, from talking to other people, it's very difficult to express your views or step out of that because the peer pressure that surrounds it, and the fact that it's very much a closed shop. If you cast your mind back to that period where you were slowly introduced to the vivisection standards, was there that feeling there where it was something that you're kind of funneled down that path? There is not really alternatives, and there's nobody you can talk to, like your peers, for instance.
Yeah, it was definitely, because it was that transition period as well that the whole country was learning to be rebellious, because after 40 years nobody dare, and all the ones that dare would be eliminated. So it was difficult to go against the grain. We didn't have the momentum, personal momentum, but we were talking among ourselves about how much we hated to have to do that, but nobody did anything. But it was that professor, Alonso de Medina, that started to waken us, the rebellious part, because he was challenging the system. He was beating it. He was doing all this stuff. And that was at the same time that this was happening. But that inspired us. So at the end of my degree, that practice stopped because we did rebel. And we did campaign against it. So after I had done it, that was the second year of my degree. But by the time of the 5th year, we already had complained enough, so they made it voluntary. So it was no longer something I had to do. So that was a tiny, small campaign I started. I wish somebody had done it a bit the year before I joined. But timing-wise, it could not have been, because there was all that window where people were not quite ready to know these things. But yes, again, Enrique Alonso, he did help also to awaken the rebellious part that is part of veganism too. And even if he wasn't a vegetarian or anything like that, but because he was challenging the system, and then we dared to challenge it and it worked, that also informed me later when I became a vegan. So when I become a vegan and I think about the vegan world, that being the goal to build, I optimistic, because I lived in a world that was so different, and then we turned it around in just a couple of years, of 5 years or 6. I had the experience to turn something completely around, and it's possible that most people don't have. But I lived it, and also I survived in all these countries by myself. So all these unsurmountable barriers and mountains that seem impossible to overcome, I have done it. Therefore, it feels the vegan world very achievable to me. So it informed me that even if it's huge and it's the biggest enterprise humanity ever will attempt, we can do it. We can do it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm always the eternal optimist. So there's a question here from Emma. She says, what are your thoughts on open rescue?
They're mixed, because open rescue is two things. It's a rescue and it's a publicity stunt. So open rescue is very good as a publicity stunt, sometimes not very good as a rescue stunt, because if you advertise your rescue and allow the police to come and remove the animal from you, you fail your rescue. So it depends what you're aiming for. I would say I understand why it exists, but also I understand why non-open rescue exists too, and how it used to be before, and the advantages that had. And there are cons, like you might be prosecuted, and that stops you doing more campaign if you're an open rescue, and limits the things you can do, while if you're never caught, that doesn't happen. There are pros and cons in all. I never done any myself, so I don't have the experience from the inside to tell you that's how it felt. But I do sometimes feel that if we lean too much into the publicity side, we'll start to forget the animals that we're there to rescue. And they become a tool of a publicity stunt, and start to move away from exactly what you were doing this for, not to use them, not even for publicity stunts. That's my opinion.
Deborah again says, you are a wonderful storyteller and a dynamic animal activist. Do you think your autism had any negative impact on your work for the animals? It appears to have allowed you to break through barriers which hold back others.
The answer is no. I think it has negative impact in my life, in many aspects of my life, but not on my work and not in my fight for the animals. So everything I achieved for animals probably would never have achieved without being an autistic person. I honestly feel that, because I zoom into my skills. I'm lucky because not everybody has that, but I'm one of those autistic persons that have skills, these extra skills that then I was able to use to do things that nobody else could do. And for years, because I didn't know I was autistic, for years people were puzzled about the kind of things I could do. And I was puzzled why they didn't do the same thing that I could do, because I thought everybody could do them. I'm thinking, for instance, when I was involved in prosecuting hunters, I was running a team of investigators that they would go out, get evidence of illegal hunting, give me the tapes, and I would decide which one, and then we prosecute, and often win. And many cases, they knew, because they knew how I work, that they would be filming stuff. There would be a fox there that they would not be able to see because they were 2 miles away. My team was operating from distance with long lens. But they knew I would be able to see them. I would see, because we autistic people see details better than the bigger picture. So, and I would just watch footage, and I would see the fogs, I would see things that nobody else could see, even running it at a high speed. And that would allow me to make judgments about which one would have enough information for prosecution or not. So there were these skills that I never associated to the autistic brain that allowed me. And even my legal case, I produced 1,300 pages of evidence. That's an autistic thing to do. So perhaps had I not been autistic, I would produce 300 pages. So I just went into it. So I think everything. But yeah, it's not always roses here. So my personal life has been negatively affected by this. So I live alone. I will die alone, possibly in a remote care home with a tattoo, vegan here, because in case I lose my memory. And I'm at peace with it, because now I know that it's not the conspiracy of the world. It's just the way that I grew up in a world that is not quite designed by for people like me.
Excuse me. Sorry. Time is marching on. Could you give us a bit of an insight into you said that there's a vivisection chapter in your latest book, Why Vegans Don't. Could you give us an overview of that chapter and what that explores?
That chapter is almost exclusively focusing on the alternatives to vivisection. So all the alternative, I went through all the potential, all the possible angles in which you can replace animal tests and research. And then dig into the details about when and how. That was published this year. There might be new things that are not there, but it's quite up to date. So it's rather than focusing on the history of vivisection or anything like that, which I would do in other subjects, I thought it would be more useful in this one, just show all the alternatives that exist and how well advanced they are. So that's what that part is.
Marvelous. And just as a wild guess, on the research that you've done and everything else, how long do you think it will be before we can force the tables and stop the vivisection industry?
Oh, that's a difficult one, because I normally have an answer to these things, because I normally, in my mind, I calculate these things, but I have never done it with the vivisection one. The vivisection one is always been, in most of the other stuff, I always, in my mind, I have a map, a route to how to achieve the goal. Vivisection, I never was able to. I found it too I never was able to have something in my mind that tells me that's definitely it, what I have in bullfighting, I have in other things. But so it still is, it could go in any direction. But therefore, I haven't been able to project and tell you a date. But we're not that far. The difference between when I started all this, but now, is the difference of the alternatives. That is what has made the difference. And you could see voices from the industry itself that they are not that keen in spending a lot of money in getting animals when you have cheaper versions that get the results. And there's changes in politics in the US that stop being compulsory to do some tests. All that are quite advanced changes. That means the final end is soon. But in animal protection, and that's a general rule I have, you don't count goals with years. You count them with generations. That the minimal unit is one generation. So if I tell you it can be done very quickly, I mean it can be done in one generation, but not next year or in 2 years. So one generation. And the vegan world, between 3 and 5 generations. That's three generations probably. In 1919, we weren't ready to get it just in 3. I think we just stepped back. We added a couple of 2 generations with the fake meats and all the cultivated meats that are delaying the entire process.
Well, I don't know if you've seen Carnage, but Simon Amstel predicts that we'll all be vegan in 2067.
So, interesting. That's
not too far away.
Well, that's good. I mean, none of these predictions ought to be right. They have a function. The function is to make you visualize that world. And when you visualize it, you work for it. So I always like people to speculate about this, even if there's no data to confirm, just because the exercise of speculation makes you think in that world. And we should never forget that world. Otherwise, we'll get lost and not realize that we are in the opposite direction now. So you should keep speculating. Actually, one of the next books I want to write, It's probably going to be titled Visions of the Vegan World, which will be purely a speculation for me about imagining how we're going to do everything to get there and once we're there. So,
well, I'm with you all the way on that one. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much, Jordi. And I look forward to seeing you all again.